To proceed, we will start now Kitab al-Talaq, or the chapter on divorce, or actually it's called Kitab, so it's the book of divorce. And as we said before so many times, there is Kitab, there is Bab, and there is Fasl. So if we call the Bab chapter, the Kitab would be bigger than the chapter. We still call it a book. It does not mean that the book has many chapters under it. It just means that it is bigger than the chapter. Sometimes it means that it is a book that has chapters under it, like Kitab al-Salah will have many chapters under Kitab al-Salah. But at times you will have a kitab that does not have chapters under it. They just called it kitab because it's too big to be called a bab or a chapter. And then you have the fasl, which is the subchapter or subsection. So here the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala, Imam ibn Qudamah, who died in the year 620 after Hijrah, says in his book Umdat al-Fiqh or al-Umdah, under Kitab al-Talaq, the book of divorce, لا يصح الطلاق إلا من زوج مكلف مختار ولا يصح طلاق المكره ولا يصح طلاق المكره ولا زائل العقل إلا السكران. Divorce is only valid from a legally competent and willful husband. Divorce under compulsion is invalid. Also invalid is the divorce of the one without intact intellect, except for the drunk. Except for the drunk. There's so much that we'll have to say here. So, Kitab al-Talaq, the chapter, or the book of divorce. Here is a disclaimer. I always say that one of the ways I find certainty, we were talking about certainty and we were talking about tajreed and stripping your disclosure of the acquired certainty. Acquired certainty is contemplation and reflection on the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reflection on the Sharia and so on. You do understand that although some people abuse this concept, but you do understand that there is a difference between Sharia and Fiqh. Sharia is what Allah had prescribed. Fiqh is, to a great extent, the human perspective, the human understanding of what Allah had prescribed, what Allah had legislated. So people abuse this to basically destroy the Sharia. They say that it's a human product, it is this, that, and we don't really need to pay attention to the codified Sharia. They call it codified Sharia. So I guess it's a pejorative term because it is the product of people that lived in different eras that are not basically like us, and we have our own minds and our own intellects, and they had their own, and all of that stuff. Certainly, all of that stuff is deviation, but at the same time, like an extreme response to this that is dogmatic, unrealistic, and untrue is unwarranted. There is a difference between Sharia and Fiqh. There is a difference between what Allah had legislated and what the scholars understood. Yes, the consensus of the scholars, the true bona fide consensus of the scholars, is, according to us, Ahl Sunnah, infallible. That's the true bona fide consensus of the scholars. But when they disagree and when there is room for disagreement, the fact that the majority or even the overwhelming majority chose a particular position does not mean that the truth is confined in that particular position. And I have shared with you my writing on the agreement of the four madhahib and when is it permissible to basically depart from or from their agreement. or take a position that is outside of the agreement of the four madhahib. If there is any particular area of fiqh that I have discomfort in, that is not Sharia, but fiqh that I have some discomfort with, it is the chapter, the book of divorce. The detailed rulings in the book of divorce by the scholars cause me a little bit of discomfort, and that is fine. I don't shy away from admitting this, and it doesn't hurt me. It doesn't hurt my certainty, because my certainty is immune, and I'm not really trying to promote myself here, but I do believe that my certainty, even my acquired certainty, let alone disclosure or anything of that nature, I'm not claiming any of that. I'm just saying that my acquired certainty, I believe it is too big to be hurt by discomfort with a few rulings or a few masail in fiqh that I just find them a little bit inconsistent with the spirit of the Sharia, or inconsistent with even sometimes the letter of the Sharia. So this is I'm not talking about my certainty in the Sharia or certainty in God. I'm talking about my certainty in our heritage, my certainty in the collective heritage of Islamic scholarship. That's the certainty I'm talking about. So I'm a believer in the beauty and soundness and authenticity and strength of the collective heritage of Islamic scholarship. And because my certainty in this is great, I don't have a problem finding a few issues. They don't cause me a crisis at all if I find discomfort in some areas, in some corners, which is completely fine, because there has to be وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it is from other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would have found much inconsistency in it. And the books of fiqh are not the book of Allah. They are the books of the authors, the scholars, the fuqaha. And if they are not the book of Allah, there will be much inconsistency in them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us this. I find comfort in this. But that inconsistency will not take away from my faith in the collective soundness, authenticity, beauty of Islamic scholarship, our heritage, our turath. Anyway, sometimes also some of these rulings were a response to idiotic individuals that are making mockery of the deen and the rulings of the deen. So when someone says to his wife, "You're taliq 2.5 times, 2.5 Sunni talaqs and 1/2 bid'i talaq." So the scholars get busy now to talking about this and addressing what to make sense of this. It is a response to an idiot who was making mockery of the deen. Anyway, Kitab al-Talaq, the book of divorce. The Shaykh said, لا يصح الطلاق إلا من زوج مكلف مختار ولا يصح طلاق المكره ولا زائل العقل إلا السكران. Divorce is only valid from a legally competent and willful husband. Divorce under compulsion is invalid. Also invalid is the divorce of the one without intact intellect, except for the drunk. There are so many issues that I will discuss, so keep track of them, of my commentary, because the commentary goes beyond the matn. So if I skip an issue, an important issue, remind me of it. So talaq, basically the beauty of this legislation, the permission of talaq. Talaq is a very beautiful legislation. that the ability to walk away from a failed relationship, it's a partnership. And like any partnership, it can become so dysfunctional to where it is not in the best interest of any party, all of the parties involved, or it is to the detriment to some of the parties involved. The parties involved here would be the wife, the husband, and the children, because they have to be always taken in consideration. This is not a partnership between two anymore. It's a family, and if there are children, they have to be given due consideration in that decision, in making that decision. But that partnership can become so dysfunctional that it could truly be to the detriment of all parties involved. And in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed divorce. And we have seen that in other religions and in other theistic traditions, Abrahamic sort of faiths, talaq is prohibited by their sort of scholars, I guess. So the prohibition of talaq will be detrimental to the spouses if it is a very dysfunctional relationship, and that could result in infidelity, right? Because you're locked into this failed relationship. It could result into infidelity. The prohibition of talaq also will often be to the detriment of the woman, because she is, throughout the ages, she is the weaker party in that partnership. She is the weaker party in that partnership. So if you lock two places in one room, one of them is stronger, one is weaker, obviously that is a disservice to the weaker. People that are in conflict. You lock them into one room and just leave them, and you throw away the key. Certainly the person that will suffer more is the weaker party. So Islam legislated talaq for these benefits, but Islam does recognize that talaq is basically a problem. Talaq means the termination of that relationship, termination of that partnership, and particularly when there are children, there could be consequences. There could be side effects, untoward consequences, and they could be massive. So what is the ruling of talaq? What is hukm al-talaq? The Sheikh talked here about when it is valid and when it is invalid, but did not start by addressing the hukm of al-talaq itself. I think sometimes in a sort of summarized manuals and mutun, they skip some rulings, and some of the rulings they skip are either fine details that are not suitable for the manual, or things that are quite known. So they figure, we'll skip this because it's known. The ruling of talaq is any one of the five categories. The five categories of rulings are haram, haram, makruh, mubah, mustahab, and wajib. Talaq could be wajib, talaq could be haram. Talaq could be anything in between. So when is talaq haram? And that's the five-pronged category, five-pronged classification is not the Hanafi one. The Hanafis add fard here, and they add makruh tanzihan, makruh tahriman, makruh tanzihan. So makruh, they split it into makruh tahriman and makruh tanzihan. But anyway, practically speaking, it converges back to the five. So the five is an easier classification, and it all comes back to the five categories. So when is it haram? Well, talaq is haram. Certainly there are certain sort of talaq al-bid'i is haram. The threefold divorce is haram to make the, and we will come to see to talk about the controversy here. but the stronger position of the majority is the threefold divorce is haram. Talaq al-bid'i is haram by consensus, which is to divorce the woman during her period or in a state of purity in which there was intimacy or intercourse. So that would be haram. But is it haram outside of that? Outside of that is talaq haram. There are two reports from Imam Ahmad. One report that it is haram, one report that it is mubah. That al-Qadi Abu Ya'la mentioned, the two reports. So, and there is so much also disagreement among the Hanafis about talaq, and that is why when I talked about the default for the Hanafi position, I used capital H and capital H2. So H and H2, I did not use capital and small h, and I used capital H and capital H2 because the disagreement among them is so intense that the Hanafis said talaq, that they disagree whether talaq is haram or makruh as a default. The default for talaq is hadr or ibaha ma'al karaha. So is the default for talaq is the prohibition, which would mean haram or makruh. Anyway, so the default for talaq, as I said, would be like this: haram, prohibited, mahzur, al-asl, al-hadr. These are the people who said al-asl, al-hadr. It is a riwayah in the Hanbali madhab that was chosen by Ibn Taymiyyah, and it is the Hanafi madhab according to Ibn Abdin. Because everybody will say, the Hanafi madhab is this, the Hanafi madhab is that. Eventually, I put a lot of trust into Ibn Abdin's choices, and Ibn Abdin is the latest of the greatest Hanafis. So anyway, so this would be haram, mahzur, prohibited, al-asl by default. And the rest of the people, including H2, which would be including a lot of Hanafis as well, would say, so you'll have the capital A, you will have the H2, you will have the S. They will say it is makruh, and the Malikis will say it is unfavorable. They don't even go as far as makruh. They say it is unfavorable. Huh? Huh? Permitted. Yeah, we will come to this classification back, but I just wanted to highlight what they say in terms of the default, and then when the nuances, we will add the nuances and talk about them here. But this is the default, and here are the nuances.
So unfavorable here means غير مستحب.
No. خلاف الأولى غير مستحب, whatever you will use to.
So the tested is makruh, and
The tested.
is غير مستحب.
No. Yes. Yeah. So haram. So if we try to make sense of the two reports from Imam Ahmad, Imam Ahmad was not, sometimes like I said before, when Imam Ahmad says two different things, you need to add nuance to them so that you are not always claiming that Imam Ahmad was always changing his mind. So sometimes he would be asking within a certain context, and another other time he'd be asking about in a different context, and we may have been unable to capture the context. So that's why you get there are ثلاث روايات, أربع روايات, خمس روايات, ست روايات, سبع روايات, ثماني روايات. It's impossible. I mean, Imam Ahmad is صاحب المسند. So it is not like, he was doing ad hoc fatawa here, and then every time he learned something more. Certainly you acquire more knowledge, you change your mind, and Imam Ahmad was impartial enough to do that and was brave enough to do that. But at the same time, it's not all about that. Just let's add a little bit of context and flavor here and understand that the Imam may have been talking about different contexts, and and the transmitters, the reporters may have not been able to capture the context. So that's why there are disagreements. So if we try to say that the madhab, the authorized view in the madhab, as we said, that it is makruh, the authorized view in the madhab is that it is makruh. But let's understand the riwayah of Imam Ahmad where he said it is haram by default. We could say that when it is completely unwarranted, entirely unwarranted, it would be haram. When it is entirely unwarranted, it would be haram. And that is someone who is just like, he gets married, he divorces, he gets married, he divorces because he just wants to change. He was like, just likes to do that. So completely unwarranted, no matter how good she is, no matter how, it's just, he wants to change. And in this case, why would it be haram? Well, let's first talk about why would it be haram in this case. It would be haram because the Prophet ﷺ said, "La darar wa la dirar." There should be no harm or reciprocation of harm, or you should not bring about harm about to yourself or to others. What does that, is divorce darar? Well, let's be real here. Divorce is darar. There is no doubt that divorce is darar. So when it is completely unwarranted, there is no doubt that there is unwarranted darar. And if it is unwarranted darar, it makes perfect sense that it would be haram. When, the hadith that I cite here, the hadith of Iblis, يَضَعْ عَرْشَهُ عَلَى الْمَاءِ ثُمَّ يَبُثُ سَرَيَاهُ أو يَبْعَثُ سَرَيَاهُ, where Iblis puts his throne on the water and then he dispatches. And if you're, don't, just like grow up and don't get stuck with how does he put his throne on the water, just, don't get distracted by this. So, and then he dispatches his troops, and he says to them that أَقْرَبُهُم مِّنْهُ مَجْلِسًا أَعْظَمُهُم فِتْنَةً, the closest, or the one that he will bring closest to him when they come back, is the one who caused the greatest fitna, or the greatest harm, the greatest evil. And then in this hadith, which is reported by Muslim, it's highly authentic, the one that Jibreel will say to Iblis will say to him, أَنْتَ وَيُقَرِّبُهُ إِلَيْهِ, the one he will bring closest to him, and he will tell him, you're the winner. He is the one who was able to separate between two spouses, between a man and his spouse or his wife. So in light of this hadith, could this be like a mubah thing, when it is the sort of the work of the shayateen? Is the work of shayateen, can the work of shayateen, or the sort of most evil work of shayateen that the Prophet ﷺ told us of, that this is the most accomplished shaitan of the day, is the one who will separate between a man and his wife. That most accomplished shaitan, did he just make this man do something mubah? That doesn't make any sense. So, you add it to this, and then it will be very obvious that I personally believe very strongly in this position. It is al-asl fihi al-hadr, unwarranted divorce has to be haram. Okay, we said that the authorized position in the madhab is that it is makruh, it is detested. And we can say that we can try to make sense of this when it is not completely warranted, it is detested. When it is entirely unwarranted, it is haram. When it is not completely warranted, it is detested. To just make sense of it and understand the reports from Imam Ahmad rationally and try to contextualize them and add nuance to them. So when it is entirely unwarranted, it is haram. When it is not completely warranted, it is makruh. But as I said, in the madhab, usually the authorized view is that it is makruh. So makruh then would be when it is not completely warranted. You know, there are conflicts, but they have not really invested enough in reconciliation. They have not invested enough. They have not shown enough patience. وعاشروهن بالمعروف فإن كرهتموهن فعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا ويجعل الله فيه خيرا كثيرا. And if you dislike them, live with them kindly, or with بالمعروف, in goodness or kindly. And if you dislike them, you may dislike a thing, and Allah would put therein much good. Allah would put therein much good. What does this ayah say? Wait, be patient. Be patient, don't be hasty. Invest more effort, more time into reconciling, into saving your marriage. Okay, so here it is conflict, but they have not really invested enough time into. Here, mubah would be when there is conflict and they have invested enough and it is just not working. It's become very dysfunctional, that it is causing harm to the two spouses and to the children. And certainly at one point, this depending, because it is a spectrum, because we're not talking about mass here. They bleed into each other. These categories overlap and bleed into each other because this is not math. We're talking about a relationship here. And we're talking about family dynamics that are extremely complicated. So to be able to provide you like clear-cut categories, this is when it is halal, this is impossible. Because we're talking about a human condition, we're talking about relationship, we're talking about dynamics that are so complicated, but where these are hints, these are hints, like sort of like a vague blueprint to when it is mubah. When is it mustahab? It is mustahab when it is dysfunctional, that it has caused harm, that people they don't honor the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is mustahab for the woman also to ask for khula if her husband is not honoring the rights of Allah, if she is not honoring, if they are not able to stay within the bounds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it is mustahab. And when there is clear-cut harm, it is mustahab. When does it become wajib? Certainly if it is court-enforced divorce, it is wajib. Court-enforced, you're being commanded to divorce your wife by the judge, then it is wajib to divorce her. But when is it also wajib? There are certain scenarios where it could be wajib. Like, let us say, the wife is not chaste, and you fear that she may bring about disgrace to the family, and and that's not uncommon. In a certain non-Muslim country, I read statistics recently that 40% of women have regular relationships with men that are not there. 40% of married women in that country, it's a non-Muslim country, but 40% of married women in that non-Muslim country, they regularly have intercourse with men that are not their husband. So these things are not really that uncommon. Hopefully the rates in Muslim countries would be much less, but again, at the same time, it does not mean that it never happens. And if there is this concern, and it is a justifiable concern, then it becomes wajib. to divorce the wife. You know, when a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said to him, "Inna imra'ati la taruddu yada lamis," my wife never pushes away the hand of anyone who wants to touch her, which means that, you know, she's promiscuous. He said to her, "Gharribha," which means send her away, divorce her. That is what it means. So divorce her. So when is it also wajib? It would be wajib, you know, and this would be like, it's a kind of worms, but if she does not pray, for instance, and she insists to not pray, and you're really Hanbali and you think that, anyway, but there are certain cases where it could become wajib. And it would be wajib on the woman also. If you're really Hanbali also, and you know, and the husband does not pray, it would be wajib on the woman to seek khula, to try to get rid of that relationship. So that's basically the ruling of divorce. The default for divorce, according to the majority, is that it is makruh because of the hadith, "Inna abghad al-halali ila Allah al-talaq," the most detested, permissible act in the sight of Allah is talaq, and this hadith is not authentically traceable to the Prophet ﷺ, but the meaning is a valid meaning. When it is halal, it is still detested most of the time when it is somewhat warranted. So because most of the time, the Prophet ﷺ, if we say that this hadith is actually traceable to the Prophet ﷺ, what would he have meant? He would have meant that most of the time it is somewhat warranted, because people don't usually just divorce because they just like to. So most of the time it is warranted, but most of the time it is still detested, disliked by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it could have still worked out and people did not invest enough into reconciliation. Ahmed, did you have a question? Something? Did you raise your hand or something? Okay. So then la yasihhat talaq. Okay. Then the next point here that the Shaykh will address, we are done with the ruling of divorce and the default for it. This next point that the Shaykh will address is la yasihhat talaq illa min zawj. Certainly, talaq will not be valid except by a zawj. So what does that mean? It means that if your wife, of course, like, people would say, well, that doesn't make sense. It makes sense, because if you divorced your wife and the divorce is finalized, and even if it is finalized, and even in her iddah, you tell her you're divorced, that does not count as a second one, because the divorce has been finalized. It's a finalized divorce. So if it is a finalized divorce, she is not a wife anymore. لا يلحقها الطلاق. She is not subject to divorce anymore. لا يصح الطلاق إلا من زوج مكلف مختار. زوج مكلف مختار. A husband who is mukallaf, authorized, and mukhtar, willful. What does he mean by mukallaf? Mukallaf means that he is sane and a sane adult. Two words, sane adult. Sane, let's go over sane and then go over adult, or let's flip. Let's go over adult. So the child cannot give a divorce. The discerning child, according to the Imam Ahmad, can issue divorce, can pronounce divorce. The majority of scholars, including small a, say the child cannot give divorce. Cannot give divorce. Can the wali give divorce on his behalf? We have discussed that controversy in the last week. But the child himself cannot pronounce divorce according to these, the discerning child, the non-discerning child according to everybody. But according to these, the discerning child cannot pronounce divorce. A says the discerning child can pronounce divorce. And the discerning child would be usually someone who's 7 or older, usually discerning child, صبي المميز. So, okay, that's as far as the child is concerned. What about the sane? So what does that mean? If you are majnoon, if you are insane, your divorce does not count. And if you go in and out of sanity, when you are insane, your divorce will not count. And there are people who are like this. There are, bipolar people, for instance, that go in and out of it. And when they lose their mind, their divorce in this case will not count. So this is not an impractical thing. This is a very practical ruling. But what about the foolish person who divorces his wife? It will count by the agreement of the 4 scholars, because we're not talking about foolishness here. We're talking about insanity. So the insane is the one. كل طلاق جائز إلا طلاق المعتوه. This was reported from Ali, and it was traceable to the Prophet, but not with a strong chain. It is probably موقوف على علي رضي الله عنه. Every talaq is valid except the talaq of المعتوه, not المعتوق, المعتوه. So every talaq is valid except the talaq of المعتوه, which is the person who is incoherent, basically lost his mind. But the scholars use this often to basically validate a lot of talaqs. Like talaq al-Hazl, for instance, jokingly. The person who pronounces talaq jokingly for the 4 mazahib will count it. It's a valid talaq. Because they say, كل طلاق جائز, he was not ma'tu, he was joking. Will count it. So foolish, it will go through. It will be validated. The foolish person. What about the person who's so angry? The person who is extremely angry, that his anger basically took him out of his. The Sheikh here says, مكلف مختار ولا يصح طلاق المكره. It has to be from a husband who is basically mukallaf, legally competent and willful. Divorce under compulsion is invalid. Divorce under compulsion is invalid. The Prophet ﷺ, and this is an important hadith in the chapter of talaq, very important hadith. This hadith was reported by Abu Dawood and Ibn Majah from Aisha radiallahu anha, considered sound by Ibn Hajar rahimahullah and others. So la talaq, so there is no talaq, meaning there is no valid talaq. Wala ataq, and no valid manumission or emancipation. في إغلاق, in a case of إغلاق. What does إغلاق mean? They disagree. إغلاق means, أغلق الباب means what? Close the door. So it means what? That their mind is completely blocked out, sort of complete mental block. Or compulsion, duress. or mental block. So it's either mental block or duress. Most of the scholars accept that it means compulsion. Because the mental block, they say that the insane with his divorce is not mukallaf. So we don't need this hadith basically to say that the talaq of the insane does not count, because the insane is not legally competent, authorized, or liable. There are two arms to taklif: to be legally authorized and legally liable. Authorized meaning competent, that you could actually tabi' wa tashtari and do things because you're competent. But liable meaning that you will be held accountable. So the one who's not mukallaf is neither competent or liable, authorized or liable. But لا طلاق ولا عتاق في إغلاق here, can we say that anger is إغلاق, or anger causes إغلاق? Yes, we can say that anger causes إغلاق, and particularly to that, and you will find the same thing often here, because certainly Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, anytime that would be unfair to him. But more, he was looking to invalidate talaqs as much as he could because of the crisis of, the muhallil thing and the issue of talaq. So whenever he found a mazhab that invalidated the talaq or something, he would certainly side with that mazhab. You could say that this was his conviction, but it was also shaped by his circumstances. Because sometimes our convictions are shaped by our circumstances and we don't think of it this way. We don't even feel it. Like when you have this crisis, and people are divorcing their wives left and right, and threefold divorce, and then threefold divorce happening all the time, and then people bring in someone to marry them for like a day and then resume the marriage afterwards and so on. That's a crisis. So now we are studying the different madhahib. Even unconsciously or subconsciously, you will be inclined to choosing the positions of the madhahib that will invalidate divorce, so that divorce becomes more of a willful decision, well thought out decision, not basically an impulse. So he was trying to invalidate all impulsive divorces. So every time there was like a madhab that invalidated impulsive divorces, he would side with that madhab. So here, the issue of anger here, and how you define anger, Ibn Abdin again, and and many of the Hanafis will not agree with this, this particular issue. But Ibn Abdin felt that anger is not, and that is Ibn al-Qayyim before him as well. So Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Abdin, with there's a few sort of nuances here, but generally speaking, Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Abdin said that there are three different levels of anger. There is an anger where you become completely unconscious, and that is like insane, and that would invalidate the talaq, by agreement. That anger that made you insane, unable to sort out right from left, man from woman, heavens from earth. You're just completely not here. You lost all of your mental faculties. You've become insane. There is the mild anger, sort of the reasonable, the moderate anger, mild to moderate anger, let us say. Mild to moderate anger that people would experience. Anyone who divorces his wife will not certainly be, some people could, but most of the time people will not be particularly having a good day. and so just like they're on a picnic or something, and then it's decided to divorce her. But so they will be somewhat angry, and we cannot invalidate all the divorces because they are pronounced in a state of anger, because that would mean there would be no valid divorces. So that type of mild to moderate anger, that will not cause the divorce to be invalid according to anyone. Now, there is some type of anger in the middle here that Ibn Abdin and Ibn al-Qayyim tried to identify. They tried to basically dissect that type of anger out of the two angers and give it some parameters that would make it somewhat objective. And they say, like, if you regret immediately, if you felt compelled, like if you felt pushed, like the type of anger that is severe, that makes you not, you're still recognizing that she's your wife, you still know that you're saying divorce, you still can differentiate between man and woman and heavens and earth and so on. You've not completely lost your mind, but it is the severe anger that feels like someone is pushing you from behind. The anger is pushing you. And in this case, it is ighlaq, because not only is it a mental block, or it removes your sort of like the complete faculty, but it is also compulsion, because the anger acts in this case as a compeller, like someone is pushing you. You're not in control anymore because your anger has overtaken you. So that level in the middle here that was identified by Ibn Abdin and Ibn al-Qayyim, this is basically where, you know, if you go to Dar al-Fatwa in al-Azhar, it's a little room next to Masjid al-Azhar, you'll see the mashayikh there, and everybody comes in and they ask them question. This is their sort of most favorite fatwa. They just look, and because they consider Ibn Abdin to be sort of classical, they're always quoting this fatwa, because it is, you know, Egypt, and, you know, people are usually angry. So it is not really difficult to you know.
What's the difference between the first one and the middle?
This is the topmost anger. This is where you're unconscious. You don't know. Like you're saying divorce, but you don't know that you're saying divorce. You don't know what it means. You can't differentiate between man and woman and heavens and earth. And so you still are able. You're conscious. You know what you're saying, but you are in a state of severe anger that you're pushed into it. You don't have complete control.
So
Okay.
is it counted or it's not counted? The same like it never happened?
Well, according to Ibn Abdin and Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Abdin, this will not count. This one will not count for sure. This will count by all of them, which is mild to moderate anger. This severe anger that did not make you unconscious will not count according to Ibn Abdin and Ibn al-Qayyim. This one.
Now, isn't that person kind of sick, really, for him to get up to that kind of anger?
Huh?
For somebody to lose the consciousness, kind of, that he's that angry, and I don't know probably how many times he got, but isn't that like sickness?
Well, a lot of people are sick, you know.
I mean, like, this is a severe sickness.
You know, if you try to,
Really,
personality disorders are very common, that if you try to find someone without a personality disorder in this room, it'll be difficult, it'll be extremely difficult.
not a well person.
Yeah. Well, yes, but a lot of people are not. But anyway, the idea here is that لا صحة طلاق إلا من زوج مكلف مختار. So we talked about mukallaf, and we talked about the child, we talked about the insane. The mukhtar is the willful, and then the mukrah, the one. So what about the state of ikrah? Forget about anger now, and what about the real state of ikrah? It is somewhat interesting that the Hanafis do not basically they do not recognize the state of ikrah, because here in a state of ikrah, someone is pointing a gun to your head, but you are completely conscious, aware, and if you pronounce divorce, they will count it against you. Under gunpoint. But the majority will not. The majority will not. And I believe the position of the majority is stronger. Not only because لا طلاق ولا اعتاق في إغلاق, and part of what, some of the scholars interpreted this to be compulsion, إغلاق, but also because the Prophet ﷺ said رفع القلم عن ثلاث. Because the Prophet ﷺ said ولا ما استكرهوا عليه, that إن الله قد تجاوز لأمتي إن الله قد تجاوز لأمتي عما عن خطأ ونسيان مستكره عليه. Yes. The other one is إن الله قد عفى عن أمتي. This is إن الله قد تجاوز عن أمتي عن خطأ ونسيان مستكره عليه. So this hadith إن الله قد تجاوز لأمتي عن الخطأ والنسيان ومستكره عليه, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically exempted or had pardoned my ummah from the okay, إن الله تجاوز لأمتي عن الخطأ والنسيان ومستكره عليه. So Allah had exempted pardoned. What else? Think of other translations. My ummah of khata, error, nisyan, forgetfulness, وَمَا اسْتُكْرِهُ عَلَيْهِ, and that which they do under compulsion. So what does it mean? What does it mean here? So does it mean, it's, I don't know if we should get into the discussion because it's like a detailed discussion, but the idea, the discussion of al-Muqtada, umum al-Muqtada, how do you interpret this? Umum al-Muqtada, Muqtada is required. Iqtada, require, Muqtada would be required. So it is a required implication. You will have to insert a word here to validate this. So exempted my ummah of error and nisyan. Does that mean that the ummah does not make errors? Does that mean that the ummah does not forget, does not do things under compulsion? No, it doesn't mean that. So you will have to figure out, what is this exemption? What is this sort of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sort of relieved us from this. So in order for us to validate this, we will have to insert a word that is required to be inserted. And whenever this happens, the Hanafis and Malikis, they try to insert the least sort of, the smallest insertion that will validate the meaning. And the Shafi'is and Hanbalis, they will try to insert the widest, most comprehensive insertion. What are they trying to do? they're saying that since we cannot understand this literally to mean that Allah relieved the Ummah from error and forgetfulness, because the Ummah still makes errors, the Ummah still forgets, then in order for us to validate this, we'll have to insert something that the Ummah has been relieved of. Is it the sin that is accrued, or is it the consequences, all the consequences? All the consequences. So the Hanafis and the Malikis, they figured we will take the sin. We will take the sin. Why? Because if we must insert something into the speech of the Prophet, we would insert the least that will validate the meaning. Right? We insert. So the sin is one of the consequences, but there are other consequences. So since we will have to insert something, we will, and they also say that some of the consequences we cannot remove. Like if you by mistake hit somebody's car and cause damage to it, all of us, we will make you liable. Everybody will make you liable because this is a property of somebody and stuff like that. So they say we cannot say the consequences, so we'll say the sin only. Then the Shafi'is and Hanbalis said, since this hadith means that these have been lifted, been exempted, relieved of them, and we cannot justify this, we cannot validate this, because obviously we are not sort of relieved of khata and nisyan completely. We still make errors and we still forget. Then the meaning must be the one right next to it. So if we cannot validate khata and nisyan, to be relieved of khata and nisyan, then we will have to validate everything that is short of the meaning that is not conceivable. So what is next to khata and nisyan being removed from the ummah is all the consequences of khata and nisyan being removed from the ummah. And then we will come to a point where certain consequences we would exclude, like the liability of destroying somebody's property, for instance. Certain consequences will be removed from all the consequences based on some other proofs, based on some other dalil. So this is the concept of umum al-muqtada, and it is the Hanbalis and Shafi'is that believe in umum al-muqtada, and Hanafis and Malikis don't believe in umum al-muqtada. But keep in mind, وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. The scholars, our genius, brilliant predecessors, they were not error-proof, and they were not. They're human beings, so you will find the inconsistencies. You will find some of the madhab that uphold a particular principle, departed from that principle. Their departure from the principle is not always because of their inconsistency. It could be because of your inability to capture the reason of their departure, but sometimes it's because they're human beings and they make mistakes. Anyway, so the divorce of the one under compulsion is invalid according to the majority, and that is Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis, and it is valid according to the Hanafis, and we said that the majority position seems to be stronger. We're still here in this one statement about Imam ibn Qudamah. It's causing us so much. So he said, وَلَا يَصِحُّ طَلَاقِ الْمُكْرَهِ وَلَا زَائِلِ الْعَقْلِ إِلَّا السَّكْرَانِ. Also invalid is the divorce of the one without intact intellect, except for the drunk. Except for the drunk. Now here is the discussion of طلاق السكران. Sakran will the divorce of the one who is intoxicated count? Keep in mind, if you are under the effect of anesthesia, that does not apply to you. If you have taken a medicine that would cause you intoxication for a valid reason, or not knowing that it will cause you intoxication, this discussion does not apply to you. The intoxication that we're talking about here is your sinful consumption of wine or sinful consumption of drugs that are intoxicant. Sinful consumption of intoxicants. That is, if you do this by error, if you do this for a medical need, if you do this this is not, your talaq does not count by agreement. You're not being addressed here. But if you have sinfully consumed intoxicants, does your talaq count? Who said yes? All of them. Does all of them mean consensus? No, it means the agreement of the four madhahib. So, who said it does not count? Can you read? Can you tell? Of course, Ibn Taymiyyah, but who before him said it does not count? Tawus and Ata, maybe? Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. Tawus al-Layth Ishaq. Abu Thawr. Ata is not one of them, right? Okay. So, but these are not insignificant. These are very big names, So what we are trying to establish here is that this is not a matter of consensus. It is the agreement of the four madhahib, and it is not a matter of consensus. If you have people like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz and Tawus and Abu Thawr and so on, who do not believe that talaq al-sakran takes place, then it is not. Keep in mind that Ibn al-Munzir reported that the consensus is that talaq al-sakran does not count. Because Ibn al-Munzir said that Uthman ruled that talaq al-sakran does not count, and there was no contestants among the Sahaba. So anyway, it is,
What's the logic?
The logic is that.
Hadith is that, but so why did they disagree? Why is not consensus? What's the
Okay, the logic. Which hadith? Which hadith?
I'm saying here the hadith. It says kullu talaq jaiz. I'm sorry. It says.
No, the Prophet did not say something about talaq al-sakran in particular. So that is where the disagreement will take place. But in general, if someone is unconscious, does not know what he's saying, then by default his talaq does not count. They actually counted the talaq against the sakran because they said that he did it to himself. Yes, but they said that he is to be punished by causing himself the state of intoxication, or everything that the sakran. Keep in mind that they agreed outside of the area of talaq that everything that the sakran does, we will hold him accountable for everything he does because he caused it to himself. So it will not only be civil liability, but it will also be criminal liability for the sakran because he's done it to himself, and no one forced him to drink. So then you drink and drive. It's your problem. Okay, but the people who said that talaq al-sakran does not count, they said that talaq is different from other sort of infractions of the law. That this is not about infraction of the law, and he needs to be conscious in order for his talaq to count. It is a matter of disagreement. Just want you to know that the agreement of the four madhahib is that talaq al-sakran counts, but I want you to know that this is not a matter of consensus. So it's the agreement of the four madhahib. Okay. we're done with the people that, we're done with the valid and invalid talaq as far as the pronouncement of talaq, as far as the pronouncer of talaq, initiator of talaq. Then the Shaykh said, وَيَمْلِكُ الْحُرُّ ثَلَاثَ تَطْلِيقَاتٍ وَالْعَبْدُ اثْنَتَيْنِ سواء كان تحتهما حرة أو أمة. The free man is entitled to 3 divorces and the slave is entitled only to 2, whether the wife is free or not. Whether the wife is free or not. If I get into the threefold divorce, I will use 10 more minutes, 5 to 10 more minutes, above the sort of the limit. So do you want me to defer this to next time, or you want me to go over this now? I have 15 minutes. I will use additional 5 to 10, maybe 5. Okay? Okay. So ويملك الحر 3 تطليقات والعبد 2 سواء كان تحتهما حرة أو أمة. The free man is entitled to 3 divorces and the slave is entitled only to 2, whether the wife is free or not. So this is the idea of the 3 divorces and the pronouncement of 3 divorces, the threefold, the composite divorce, the composite threefold divorce. What is the ruling of the composite threefold divorce? And why is it a problem? We will talk about whether it counts as 3 or counts as 1 later. But what is the ruling to begin with? Is it halal to make that pronouncement or haram? For someone to say to his wife, Anti taliq bis-thalatha. Is it halal to make that pronouncement or haram? Haram. Yes, it is haram according to the majority. And the reason why it is haram is that it is sort of, the reason why it is haram is that it was not prescribed, and if it is not prescribed, مَنْ أَحْدَثَ فِي أَمْرِنَا هَذَا مَا لَيْسَ مِنْهُ فَهُوَ رَدٌّ. It is ihdath, it is innovation. And for the people who would count it as 3 divorces, it is haram because he had basically deprived himself of the chance to reconcile and to go back to his wife. Had he given her 1 divorce, they would have been able to go back together. So it is haram according to A plus H plus M capital. And it is mubah according to A2 plus S. Actually, another position in the Hanbali madhab and the Shafi'is don't find a problem in it. It's just, he lost a chance. He deprived himself of the ability to have raja'ah, to take his wife back. It's up to him. He's entitled to divorce. He's entitled to 1. And if he's entitled to 1, he's entitled to 3. They didn't find a problem with it. Okay, but the majority said that the threefold divorce is haram. And so the next, the big one is coming, which is does this count as 1 or 3? When someone says to his wife that she is divorced, talaq bis-thalatha or something, does this count as 1 or 3? Okay, who said it counts as 3? Is everybody up? Okay, so they said it counts as 3. And then they say it counts as 3 because he is capable of 1 divorce, then he's capable of 3 divorces, and if he's capable of 3 consecutive divorces, then he's capable of 3 simultaneous divorces, and if he's done it to himself, then it is his fault. And they report also there is some report from Abu Rukana that he divorced his wife he gave his wife a threefold divorce, And there are variants of this report. Some of them will say that the Prophet ﷺ said to him, take your wife back, and he did not count it as like a sort of the finalized divorce without recourse. And some will say that no, this is not true, that some reports said that the Prophet ﷺ enforced it. Honestly speaking, because of the conflicting reports, it makes perfect sense that we should not use this on either side. That this whole story of Abu Rukana should not be used by the people who count it as 3 or by the people who count it as 1, because we really have conflicting reports about the same story. And there cannot be different Abu Rukanas, who divorced their wives 3 times. So it has to be inconsistency among the narrators, and that creates doubt sufficient enough to disregard these reports when it comes to making the rulings. One thing that we have not mentioned in the beginning is the different types of divorce, and you guys did not remind me. You thought coming to all that time, and okay, we're almost done. Oh, okay, but anyway, so the different types of divorces here would be raj'i and ba'in. So raj'i and ba'in. Raj'i means what? Unfinalized. Ba'in means what? Finalized. And the ba'in is ba'in baynuna, sughra, and baynuna kubra. So this is baynuna sughra means finalized with recourse. And baynuna sughra means finalized without recourse. Okay, so what is a talaq raj'i? All the talaq by default is raj'i. Every time someone divorces his wife, can take her back during her period. That is raj'i. Take her back during her period. So the first divorce, the second divorce, first divorce, second divorce, the default is that a man can take his wife back during her period. That is raj'a. That is to take her back without a new contract. No new contract. So take her back during the period without a new contract. That is talaq raj'i, and that is the default for all first and the second divorces during the period. When does the talaq become ba'in, becomes finalized? All of the talaqs after the period are ba'in, right? All of the talaqs after the period are ba'in. And all of the talaqs, when does the talaq become ba'in? In the period. There are talaqs that don't have period. That is the talaq before consummation. There is no period. So the woman does not have to observe a period. So without consummation, there is no period to begin with. So the talaq is ba'in immediately, right? No period for the woman who did not consummate her marriage after the contract. We're talking about all termination before consummation. Khula, even after consummation, is ba'in during the iddah. Khula or talaq bi'awad is ba'in whether it is before or after consummation. That's regardless of the consummation thing. So all khula and talaq bi'awad, khula and talaq bi'awad. So after the period, all the talaqs become ba'in. There are women who don't have any period. During the period, certain talaqs for women who have to observe the period, during the period, the default for the first and the second is that they are raj'i. He can take her back. Third, ba'in. Talaq bi'awad, which is talaq in return for compensation, or khula ba'in even before the period ends. It becomes a ba'in from the time of pronouncement. That is third, that is talaq bi'awad. Or that is court-enforced divorce, tatliq, by the court. That is court-enforced divorce as well. So this becomes a ba'in immediately. Now, when is it baynuna sughra or baynuna kubra? The default is that it is baynuna sughra, finalized with recourse, meaning that they can remarry with a new contract and everything, but they can remarry. When is it baynuna kubra? Third divorce. And then there is like a baynuna kubra that is really sort of, that is li'an, public imprecation. They can't even go back together even after she gets married to another man. They just, that's it. Not in this life, you're done. So these are the different types of talaq, to just put things in perspective. So now we're talking about the threefold divorce here, and the composite threefold divorce. Now, by consensus, if you have consecutive 3 divorces, your wife will not be halal for you until she marries another man, consummates her marriage with the man, and then you could remarry later on. You could remarry later on. That's by consensus. Where the composite threefold divorce is when you make the pronouncement when they are combined, simultaneous. It's one pronouncement where you divorce your wife 3 times. Or according to a small minority, if the pronouncement was back-to-back without raj'a in between them. And honestly speaking, I believe that this would be most consistent with ayah, the verse in the Quran, that there has to be divorce, raj'a, divorce, raj'a, divorce, raj'a, for that third divorce to become finalized without recourse. As Ibn Ashur rahimahullah pointed out, that this would be the implication of the ayah. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not allow them to come back after a third divorce? Because people during that time, men during that time, would abuse the women, and they would have unlimited number of divorces. They divorce, they take her back. They divorce, they take her back, as long as she is in her iddah. And then, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, no, you are entitled up to 3. In addition to this, there is another wisdom, which I point out in the commentary. The other wisdom is that sometimes people are too afraid of the unknown. They're just too paralyzed to take an unnecessary, brave decision to terminate the marriage because it is completely dysfunctional. And they have been unable, like they got divorced, they came back and tried again, and then it didn't work out, came back, tried again, didn't work out. So as if Allah is telling them, there is life away from each other. You may be successful with a different partner. You are not a good match. It's an obvious mismatch. Find yourself somebody else. That's the message here. So that third divorce, that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow them to go back after the third divorce. Okay, so the composite threefold divorce, we said that the 4 madhahib said that it will count. There is a minority position that said it will not count. That said it will not count as 3, it will count only as 1. Will not count as 3, and it will count only as 1. Before I discuss this minority position, because you know that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah died in jail because of this position. So Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah is the person who basically fought for this position, defended this position. It is known to be his, and even the laws in Muslim countries that take, that take that position, they call it his. They call it Ibn Taymiyyah's position, whether it is. And keep in mind that these are laws, the legislatures in those countries, or the IFTA bodies in those countries, are not particularly like fans of Ibn Taymiyyah, but they still attribute the position to him, and they still uphold that position. You'll find countries like Syria and Jordan and Egypt and so on, and of course in Saudi Arabia, they take that position. It is a position that they uphold. And they refer to Ibn Taymiyyah because he's the one who basically fought for it, he's the one who defended it the most. It's like Ibn Hazm and music, for instance. So certainly Ibn Hazm is not the only one in the world to say that music was halal, but since he's the one who wrote about it in detail and fought for it, sort of like was assertive about it and gave a detailed wrote a detailed treatise in defense of it. Then it became Ibn Hazm's position. Anyway, and I'm not comparing the two because I believe when it comes to music, I believe in the majority's position. But I'm just saying that sometimes a position would be known to be somebody's when it is not only his, but it is because he is the one who wrote most extensively on it. Now read for me what Ibn Hajar, read for me the names of the names that were mentioned. Ibn Hajar, Ibn Tin rahimahullah said that this was a consensus that 3 divorces count as 1, and no one ever disagreed. So Ibn Hajar was really sort of triggered by this, were really and really found it completely unfounded statement of Ibn Tin rahimahullah, and he mentioned the people who actually considered the threefold divorce to count only as 1. Certainly the greatest of all would be Ali ibn Mas'ud, ibn Abbas, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, al-Zubayr, at least in that layer, that's the layer of the Sahaba. Ali ibn Mas'ud, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, al-Zubayr, ibn Abbas, that is in the layer of the Sahaba. You come down a little and then you will find Tawus and Ata, I think. Tawus and Ata, and who else? Muhammad ibn Baqi ibn Makhlad, okay. Muhammad ibn Abd Salam al-Khushani, he's a Maliki scholar, yeah. Well, from the people later on, it is Ibn Ashur, and he also cited Ibn Zinba''s position, Muhammad ibn Zinba' position, and he cited some other Malikis. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that although this was the agreement of the 4 madhahib, it is completely unfair and unfounded to say that this is something Ibn Taymiyyah made up. When you have all of this precedence, it is not like something that you made up without precedence. And what are their proofs? What are their proofs? And Tahir ibn Ashur, who is the great Maliki scholar of our times, talks about this when he talks about the tafsir of the ayat in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the 3 divorces. الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. ولا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا إلا يخاف ألا يقيم حدود الله فإن خفتم ألا يقيم حدود الله فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به تلك حدود الله فلا تعتدوها ومن يتعدى حدود الله فأولئك هم الظالمون فإن طلقها فلا تحل له من بعد حتى تنكح زوجا غيره فإن طلقها فلا جناح عليهما يتراجع إن ظن أن يقيم حدود الله وتلك حدود الله يبينها لقوم يعلمون. Okay, so in these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says الطلاق مرتان. So divorce, طلاق مرتان means divorce is twice. Yeah. فإمساك بمعروف, like, you know, you divorce twice, and then after the second divorce, فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. Then you hold them kindly, you take them back and hold them, stay married kindly, or تسريح بإحسان, or beautiful termination. إحسان, excellence, graciousness, beautiful termination. So you hold them kindly, release them kindly, excellently. ولا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا إلا أن يخاف إلا يقيم حدود الله. And it is not permissible that you take anything back from them that you had given them, you know, to the women. إلا أن يخاف, except if they fear that they do not stay within the bounds of Allah. And if they fear that they don't stay within the bounds of Allah, then there is no blame on either one of them if she ransoms herself. That is khul'a. She ransoms herself. فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به, with whatever she ransoms herself with. She ransoms herself from the marriage. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that these are the bounds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the limits of Allah, don't cross them. Those who cross them are the zalimun, the transgressors. Then Allah said, فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا, thereafter, if he divorces her, then فلا جناح فلا تحل لهم من بعد فلا جناح عليهما فإن طلق فلا جناح عليهما يتراجع إن ظن أن يقيم حدود الله فإن طلقها فلا تحل لهم من بعد حتى تنكح زوجا غيره. Okay. So if he divorces her, then there is no blame on them if they come back together. If they believe that they can stay within the bounds of Allah, and then if he divorces her, then then it will not become halal for him to take her back until she marries another person. So the point that Tahir ibn Ashur is making here is that these are obviously consecutive divorces. The ayah is not speaking about simultaneous divorces. The ayah is speaking about divorce and raj'ah and divorce and raj'ah and divorce and raj'ah, and it is clear that these are consecutive divorces. And it is clear in the sort of the philosophy of the legislation that this is based on, the whole thing is predicated on having had enough chances, and now it's time to move on. But the simultaneous composite threefold divorce, that is not having enough chances. It is being married to a woman for 7 years, for 17 years, having 7 kids together, and then you get into a conflict and you say, Inti talaq bis thalatha, and then you're done and she's done and the kids are out. That crisis is not what the legislator had intended in the belief of the scholars who count this as one divorce, the composite threefold divorce, in their belief that this is not what the legislator had intended. I find, as Ibn Ashur points out, this ayah to be the strongest evidence on the side of the minority position that counted threefold divorce as one divorce. In addition to this ayah, you will have the Abu Rukana, and we said we will not use Abu Rukana. Both sides should not be using Abu Rukana because of the conflicting and the variant reports. But then you will have the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas, and that is also a strong, although certainly Ibn Hajar, who is a supporter of the majority position, provides an excellent rebuttal of the use of the citation of the hadith of Abdullah ibn Abbas. Yet at the end of the day, this is a hadith that is solid. It's reported by a Muslim, authentically traceable to the Prophet ﷺ. And the wording, the expression of Abdullah ibn Abbas seems to be also solid when it comes to implication that divorce used to be count as one during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr and the beginning of the Khilafah of Umar, and then Umar said, إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ تَتَايَعُوا فِي أَمْرٍ كَانَتْ لَهُمْ فِيهِ أَنَا فَلَوْ أَمْضَيْنَاهُ عَلَيْهِمْ, that people are making haste in a matter in which they should have exercised deliberation. Let us count it against them. So this was basically disciplinary action by Umar, the people who said, so if you say, let's say that it actually is one, counts as one, and Umar did this as a disciplinary action. So if this is your belief, well, the majority said no, Umar did not start this, so they don't have to answer for Umar or speak on behalf of Umar, because they'll say this is something the Prophet ﷺ, this is the status quo, this is the legislation, default. But the minority position who said that Umar actually did this, then they will have to split. And some of them will say, Umar did it. It may have not been particularly, the best thing to do, but, Umar is Umar, and if his mistakes are submerged in the ocean of his hasanat and good deeds and so on, but the majority of them will say that it is within, and that creates also it is consequential, because the majority of them will say that this is within the capacity of the sultan, the authorities, to enforce certain disciplinary actions, to restrict the mubah, we have said before, to enforce certain disciplinary actions when the people abuse the legislation. And I believe in the second position. I believe that it was warranted of Umar to instigate this as a disciplinary action, but the disciplinary action does not change the default. It is a qishra, it is a crust that can be removed. It is like an executive order by the sultan that can be sort of reversed by the next sultan or by some other sultan. And that seems to be the way we can come to terms with this. So the majority of contemporary scholars at this, in our times, do count the threefold divorce as one divorce. Now, someone may say, someone may say that Imam Taymiyyah rahimahullah defied the establishment and was brave enough to defy the establishment. Keep in mind that there was precedent, there were proofs that he could cite in favor of his position, and there were many precedents. So it is not for anyone to this is not basically to support rebellion against the established fiqh. If you have the same amount of knowledge that he had, having reached the pinnacle of al-ulum al-aqliyya wa al-naqliyya, rational and transmitted knowledge, if you have as strong proofs as he had, and if you have precedent, which we mentioned so many of them, then maybe, if these are the prerequisites to go ahead and defy an established position. We don't have an establishment, but we have established positions that somebody can defy them if they fulfill those three criteria. They are mujtahideen, who reach the rasikhun fil ilm wa mujtahideen, and they have proof, strong proof, and they have precedent. He had all of them. قولوا قولي هذا أستغفر الله لكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.